They told her to stand down, that her clearance had expired, her presence unnecessary. For 9 years, the system had marked her as inactive, her name engraved on the memorial wall, her mission archived in silence. No one questioned why the sealed hangar suddenly lit up. No one expected the aircraft to move, and when it did, command scrambled to contain what they assumed was a breach. Orders were issued, runways locked down, but then everything changed. An envelope was opened. A name reappeared on the radar, and a forgotten directive began to unfold, one that only she could complete. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. The sun had barely slipped behind the ridge when the memorial ceremony began at Crimson Reach Air Base. Along the western perimeter, shadows stretched across the tarmac in long, quiet bands, brushing against the undersides of hangars and dormant aircraft. The flag hung at half-mast, the fabric unmoving in the still desert air. Rows of personnel stood shoulder to shoulder, dress uniforms pressed, hands clasped behind backs. In the silence that followed, taps. No one moved. The sound of that final note lingered longer than it should have, suspended in the dry twilight like a breath not yet released. Near the edge of the crowd, Theo stood alone, hands rough and calloused, resting just in front of his belt buckle. His head was bowed slightly, not for protocol, but for Ella, the name he had touched every year since her disappearance. It was there on the memorial wall, carved in clean serif letters beneath a golden backlight that caught every line of dust and regret. Ella Keene, call sign Talon Shade, lost during blackout recon, presumed killed in action. 9 years had passed, but the ache never had. He had prepped that jet himself, had seen the hangar sealed with 2 security codes and a weld tag. Nobody was ever supposed to open it. Behind the flag display, a folded triangle of cloth sat in its glass case. It had never been presented to family. There had been none available to receive it. Theo had volunteered to keep the case in the ready room, just out of sight from the others. It wasn't grief that tied him to it. It was something colder, responsibility, doubt. A fragment of his own signature still existed on the final maintenance log. That had been the last time her name appeared in an active record. The ceremony moved on. A chaplain spoke briefly, followed by a new pilot whose voice trembled slightly as he read the roll call. One by one, the names of the fallen were read aloud. Most were only a few years gone. Then came Ella's. There was a pause. Not long, but noticeable. She had been the youngest pilot in her cohort, the only one cleared for the Eagle prototype trial. She had flown it like it breathed with her. Theo kept his eyes down. Then the sound hit. It wasn't part of the program. It didn't belong. Somewhere across the darkened east apron, a low mechanical groan rolled through the evening air, followed by a sharp ignition crack that shattered the silence like a whip. Heads turned. A few startled murmurs rose from the back row. Theo blinked and turned his head slowly toward the sound, even before his brain caught up. Inside the control tower, Malik had already stood up from his console. The monitor nearest his elbow had begun flashing red. He tapped a key, then another, pulling up the base-wide aircraft activation grid. There it was. Hangar Delta 2. Motion registered. Door unsealing. Engine heat signature rising. Malik stared at the line of text again to be sure. Tail 056, call sign Talon Shade, ignition confirmed. His supervisor walked over slowly, puzzled, glancing down just as Malik whispered the words under his breath. She's gone. She's been gone 9 years. Outside, the sealed hangar groaned open. The crowd was beginning to shift now, unsure if it was a drill or some part of the ceremony that had not been briefed. A few command staff turned to one another, exchanging tight looks. Theo had already taken 2 steps forward, his mouth open slightly, but no sound coming out, his eyes fixed on the shape emerging from the shadows. The modified F-15EX rolled forward on steady wheels, its metallic surface catching the last threads of fading daylight. Unlike the other aircraft on base, it bore no visible squadron markings, only a deep matte silver skin and a call sign panel dulled with time. As it passed beneath the runway lights, the side panel reflected the words that should not have been there. Talon Shade. The jet's canopy remained closed. No external lighting was activated. The engine tone was low, deliberate, climbing slowly in power as it turned onto the taxiway with perfect, practiced control. The pilot offered no radio call, no handshake, no clearance code. In the tower, Malik's hands moved rapidly across the console. He was locked out of the override system. His supervisor barked into a headset, trying to route through central control. The base commander, Jordan, had already left the main tent, making his way toward the flight line in a clipped, angry stride. Back at the ceremony site, the reverence was gone. Murmurs gave way to argument. Some shouted for the engines to be shut down immediately. Others stared in disbelief, unsure whether to move or salute. A few younger cadets laughed nervously, assuming it had to be a demonstration. A tribute flight, maybe. Something pre-programmed. Theo knew better. He could see the way the aircraft banked slightly as it rolled, the precise calibration of its trim, the micro-adjustments on final turn-in. No simulator could fake that. No ground team could pre-code a takeoff this clean. Whoever was in that cockpit was flying from muscle memory. The folded flag sat untouched in its glass case as the first set of red strobes flickered on from the hangar perimeter. Security vehicles pulled forward onto the outer taxi lanes, headlights flooding the tarmac. The engine pitch from Talon Shade increased again, steady and purposeful. A tower command came over the base-wide system. Unidentified aircraft, shut down immediately. You are not cleared for movement. Respond now or prepare to be interdicted. Still no response. The aircraft reached the primary taxi threshold and slowed. For one long second, everything stopped. Even the vehicles hesitated. Then the jet surged forward. The wheels lifted, nose rising with familiar grace, and the modified F-15EX launched into the dusk, cutting upward on a clean climb vector toward the darkening sky. Theo didn't breathe. In the tower, Malik's screen flashed one last line before freezing. Call sign Talon Shade, status active. Someone behind him whispered the obvious. That jet was sealed. That pilot was dead. But Malik knew what the system had confirmed. Not anymore. That was no simulation. That was a return. Inside the control tower, the room had shifted from ceremony protocol to active operations in a matter of seconds. Malik stood behind his console, hands hovering above the keyboard, uncertain which command to prioritize. The monitors flashed in rhythmic warning, bathing the room in pulses of amber light. A familiar voice cracked through the comms panel, clipped and firm, issuing orders to reroute ground crew, halt all non-essential flights, and clear the main runway. But none of those steps addressed the aircraft now rising through the darkening airspace, silent and perfect in its climb. Malik tapped into the base's primary tracking overlay. The radar showed one active flight, one signature, tail number 056. The IFF readout next to it said the same thing it had 9 years ago. Inactive. Presumed lost. Pilot status killed in action. But the aircraft was in motion, its systems fully operational, its trajectory clean. Malik refreshed the system twice. The IFF didn't update. It simply pulsed red, blinking every 2 seconds like a heartbeat from another world. The base commander, General Jordan, stood at the center of the control deck. His voice was calm, but Malik could hear the edge creeping into it. He was speaking to someone on the secure channel, repeating information he didn't yet believe. Yes, it's a live bird. No, we did not authorize activation. No, there is no scheduled test flight. Hangar Delta 2 has been sealed since the blackout recon event. We're pulling visual now. 2 chairs down. Another technician pushed a live feed to the center screen. It showed the F-15EX banking smoothly against the purple haze of evening. No flight wobble, No atmospheric disturbance. It moved like it had just been pulled off a showroom floor. But Malik knew what that airframe had looked like 9 years ago. He had seen it during orientation, had read the story. It was a prototype, stealth modified, and mothballed after the disappearance. No one touched Talon Shade. Not since the day Ella vanished. Malik turned to his supervisor, trying to keep his voice level. The aircraft is broadcasting a handshake, not a response signal, but a pattern loop. 3 flashes of the same call sign. It's broadcasting Talon Shade on encrypted intervals. Look. He pointed to the secondary panel, where the system was logging each pulse. First at 90 seconds, then 45, then 30, then lock. The aircraft had identified itself. The supervisor frowned, leaning in. That's not possible. Those codes were scrubbed from the active registry. Nobody can spoof a dead pilot's signal. Malik looked back at the screen, then glanced toward the comms tower log. The transmission route didn't match any internal network. It was embedded, a deeper layer, a ghost pattern riding on the edge of the frequency band, too low for standard receivers. It was how deep surveillance drones pinged during blackout training. He had only seen it in archived SIM footage. Below the tower, red emergency lights came on along the runway perimeter. Security trucks moved into position, engines low and alert. The broadcast system activated with a shrill tone. All base personnel. This is an emergency lockdown. Repeat. Emergency lockdown in effect. Clear the tarmac and prepare for security override. Unidentified aircraft is in restricted airspace. Prepare for possible breach. Jordan stepped to the comms desk. His hand moved over the switchboard as he leaned in close to the mic. This is General Jordan. Aircraft 056. You are in violation of base protocol. Identify immediately. You have 10 seconds to comply. Nothing came back. Theo had reached the outer line of security when the voice rang through the speakers. His boots crunched against the gravel. The security teams didn't stop him. Most didn't recognize him. He no longer wore the base patch. His jacket was plain. But he knew the pattern. He could see the perimeter forming, and the misjudged distance between their vehicles and where the aircraft would land if it continued inbound. He moved past the edge light and toward the command group standing behind the mobile terminal. She's not breaching, he said aloud, more to himself than to them. She's coming home. The team lead nearest him turned sharply. Who are you? Theo didn't answer. He was already looking past them, watching the trajectory. No evasive maneuvers. No erratic banking. Just a clean, controlled descent arc that aligned with Vector 7. She was aiming for home position, the one no one used anymore. The one Theo had marked during her final calibration. It was still active in the system if you knew how to find it. Back in the tower, Malik's panel pinged. The IFF had changed. It no longer said inactive. It now read dormant. Status temporarily suppressed. A code blinked below it. One Malik had never seen. Vector 11 initiated. He leaned forward. This isn't a hack. It's a trigger. She set this up herself. His supervisor spun toward him. That's not possible. You think she's alive and flying that thing? That someone just walked back from the dead and bypassed 9 years of security? Think Malik. Malik stood his ground. I don't think she bypassed anything. I think we were always meant to ignore the signs until she came back. The supervisor opened his mouth, then stopped. On the main display, the camera feed zoomed in on the jet. The call sign was now visible beneath the canopy in faint etched lettering. Talon Shade, not stenciled, etched, like it had never been removed. Jordan stared at the screen and turned away from the mic. Get everything on the ground. Now. If that jet lands, we intercept and detain. I want ground teams ready to extract the pilot immediately. No assumptions. Theo reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin envelope, sealed in tape, yellowed with age. He had carried it for 9 years, had never opened it, had nearly burned it once. It was addressed in Ella's handwriting, to be opened If I ever come back. He didn't open it. Not yet. He just held it in plain sight as he stepped past the security line and walked straight toward the command truck, ignoring the shouts behind him. She wouldn't fly back unless she had a reason, he said. You all think this is a threat. But I helped build that aircraft. I saw how she trained. This isn't an attack. This is a signal. Malik's monitor flickered, a final flash, then static. Call sign confirmed. Talon Shade, status active. The first screen blinked out just after the emergency lights stabilized. 1 second. Malik was tracking the vector trajectory of the inbound F-15EX. The next, the feed dropped to a static wash of gray. He tapped twice, then 3 times, rerouting to the alternate grid. That screen failed, too. Within 20 seconds, the entire radar array at Crimson Reach Air Base collapsed into silence. Green trace lines vanished. Overlay grids disintegrated. Even the standby thermal panels went dark. What remained were blank monitors reflecting the anxious faces of the control team in their glow. The primary comms feed popped twice, then went dead. Jordan reached for the analog backup handset and found only hissing static around him. The other officers scrambled to verify whether it was internal sabotage or an external intrusion. Emergency channels began to loop. Not incoming, but corrupted signal fragments repeating half-coded commands in broken sequence. At ground level, the mobile command unit erupted into motion. Technicians shouted for cable reroutes. One ran for the generator panel, assuming a power fault. But the power was fine. The infrastructure was sound. What had failed wasn't mechanical. It was logical. The system had been overwritten, not destroyed, replaced, line by line. Jordan turned to the operations lead, his voice cutting through the panic. I want confirmation. Is this a cyber attack? Is the inbound aircraft spoofing our systems? The lead opened his mouth, hesitated, then nodded. All current markers suggest breach-level interference. Encryption patterns don't match any known foreign signature, but it's rewriting our protocols in real time. On the tarmac, the sky had gone full dusk. The inbound aircraft remained a quiet silhouette against the dimming west. No floodlights marked the runway anymore. The strobes along Vector 7 stayed dark. The ground crew had withdrawn past the secondary fence line. Only the hum of the approaching jet remained. It was still descending. Still perfect. Inside the cockpit, Ella adjusted trim control by feel. She did not need radar. She did not want guidance. She moved through the blackout with total awareness. Every ridgeline, every tower shadow, every shift in wind had been mapped long before this night. She had memorized the terrain when it was raw, when Crimson Reach was still called Observation Point 3. She closed her eyes for a moment and saw it again. The layout, the wind pattern, the way thermals kicked just past the third hill when the temperature dipped below 100.0 degrees. She adjusted course by 2 degrees. The aircraft responded immediately. In the flight deck beneath the control tower, Theo stood still. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't watching the screens anymore. He had opened the envelope, the one she had given him 9 years ago, the one labeled, "For when everything else fails." Inside was a page torn from her analog flight chart. Her writing was still clear, still strong. It listed every power node across the base's landing field, manual override codes, fail-safe vectors. At the bottom was a single phrase. If this activates, the system is already compromised. The plane is mine. Let it land. He turned toward the mobile terminal, holding the page above his shoulder. She built this into the base. Nobody moved. Jordan stepped forward slowly. He looked down at the paper, then back at the tower. How would she know? Because she told me, Theo said, his voice shaking with something that wasn't fear. She told me 9 years ago that if the wrong satellite ping ever hit our net, this system would lock itself down. She wired the back door into the radar scaffolding. This isn't an attack. It's a warning. And that aircraft is the key. Inside the jet, Ella rolled beneath the cloud shelf. Below her, The base fell away into muted silence. No signals, no flares, no indicators. But she saw the approach line, even without lights. The terrain marked it. The trees at the southern slope curled differently. The concrete band below her had a faint color shift from where old patchwork had aged under different sun exposure. It was enough. She lowered her altitude by 4 meters and adjusted yaw. At the control deck, Malik had switched to analog scopes. They offered nothing useful. No imagery, no range, only silence. His screen flashed one final sequence before total blackout. Vector 11 engaged. Theo's voice rose, steady now. That was the protocol she named. Vector 11. That's what this is. She left the instructions for a future we weren't ready to believe could come. And now it has. Jordan turned back toward the line of security vehicles. One of them had shifted. Headlights angled toward the old runway. A few airmen stood frozen behind their hoods, watching the sky. From the ground, they could hear it now. The steady pulse of an aircraft gliding low, descending blind, no digital support, no beacon, just presence, just memory. Theo walked away from the terminal without waiting for permission. He passed the line of vehicles, crossed the open concrete, and stopped at the edge of Vector 7. The wind stirred dust around his boots. In his hand, he still held the flight chart. The grease pencil markings had not faded. His fingers traced the margin. He remembered when she had drawn them. The lights across the base flickered once, then failed completely. In that moment, the base went utterly still. No power, no command, no certainty. Only a sky waiting for return. And Ella guiding herself home. The engines came first. A low, steady rhythm like breath. The sound rolled over the base with no echo, no distortion, only presence. In the dark, with all systems shut down, there was no way to verify altitude or approach. No landing lights, no strobes, no radio cues. Yet the aircraft moved with absolute certainty. It slipped through the blackout like it had always belonged there. The security teams at the southern checkpoint stood frozen, rifles lowered, eyes wide. None of them spoke. The F-15EX descended cleanly, nose perfectly level, wings steady in the crosswind. The modified control surfaces whispered against the air as it adjusted for a faint gust over the ridge. There were no digital overlays inside the cockpit, no sensor sweep, no radar support. Ella guided the jet by memory alone. She could feel the runway beneath her even before it appeared. She had mapped its angles into muscle. She knew where it cracked in the north end. She knew where heat shimmer made the line curve under midday sun. She brought the aircraft down smooth and slow. The wheels touched with a brief puff of vapor. No bounce. The fuselage settled. Brakes engaged. The F-15EX rolled to a stop dead center on the blackout strip. It faced no lights, no flags, no direction, just silence. From the tower's lower platform, Malik watched the landing with his hands on the edge of the console. Every display was still dark. He had no telemetry, no confirmation, only his eyes. He watched the jet rest in place like it had never left. A silver phantom caught in the moment between disbelief and truth. Down on the tarmac, Theo moved. He had stood long enough. The envelope was in his hand, the one she had given him, sealed, dated, forgotten until now. He walked past the frozen line of command staff. No one stopped him. They watched him pass, each one unsure if the rules still applied. He reached the edge of the landing zone just as the canopy hissed open. It moved slowly, lifting with a soft mechanical sigh that echoed across the flight line. A rush of cooler air spilled out, followed by silence. Then she stood. Ella stepped onto the wing of the aircraft, her boots leaving faint marks in the heat haze of the metal. Her flight suit was streaked with salt and grit, the collar damp with sweat. Her hair, once dark, now carried streaks of silver at the temple. Her gloves were burned at the palms, scorched where they had gripped the manual throttle during descent. She said nothing. She looked at no one. Theo raised the envelope. General Jordan finally stepped forward. His voice was rough but clear. Who is flying that aircraft? Ella stepped down from the wing and landed on the concrete without a sound. Her eyes met his. Theo answered before she could. That is Ella Keene, sir. Pilot designation Talonshade. She was never lost. She was placed under blackout status by Protocol Vector 11, 9 years ago. Jordan shook his head. That can't be. She was declared dead. We held a memorial. Her name is on the wall. Theo held out the envelope. So is mine. Jordan took it, slowly peeling back the seal. Inside was a single folded page and a thin plastic ID card. The paper was yellowed slightly, the ink still bold. At the top, it read, Vector 11. Below it, a line of coded instructions, timestamps, and a line of clearance signatures. The final line bore her name. Still active. Ella Keene, tactical override pilot, authorized to breach under full system lockdown. Failsafe Vector 170. No radio. Behind them, the crowd was beginning to gather. Security teams had lowered their weapons. A few airmen removed their helmets. Flashlights shone upward, illuminating the jet from below. The silver surface shimmered. The call sign etched just under the canopy line was visible now. Not painted. Etched. Talonshade. Jordan looked at her again. This landing was not cleared. This action violates every modern engagement protocol. Ella finally spoke. So, did the blackout. You think I returned to fly? I returned to stop what I built to detect. The base was never the target. It was the tripwire. I waited 9 years for that tripwire to trigger. It just did. Riley, the base psychologist, approached quietly from the left. She had seen the aftermath of the original loss. She had counseled 3 different squad mates who carried the guilt of letting Ella disappear. She had helped draft the ceremony. She now stood still and said only one word. Ella. Ella turned her head slightly. Recognition flashed across her face, brief but unmistakable. Yes. Theo stepped forward again. Everything she warned me about has happened. The systems failed. The radar collapsed. Communications broke apart. But she didn't. She came back. Not for clearance. Not for applause. She came back because the moment needed her. No one spoke for a long time. The air smelled of jet exhaust and desert wind. The stars had begun to break through above the ridgeline. The base remained dark, but the runway, in that one perfect line where the jet had come to rest, seemed to glow faintly with its own presence. Ella looked toward the memorial wall. Now just a silhouette in the distance. You don't need to erase my name, she said, but you do need to understand why I left it there. It wasn't a marker of death. It was a reminder of what it takes to disappear when no one else can. Jordan held the paper one more time, then folded it neatly. Then you better explain it to them. All of them. She nodded once, then turned toward the group forming near the edge of the landing pad. They parted without a word. She walked through them in silence. Her boots still left no sound. The runway had fallen silent again, but this time the silence was different. Not stunned, not frightened, but suspended. As if every person on base now understood they were witnessing something that rewrote the rules they had lived under. The jet remained still at the end of Vector 7, its engine winding down to a soft, idle hum. The crowd had begun to gather in full, not by command, but by gravity. Even those who had once scoffed at the old stories or treated the memorials like tradition without meaning now stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the figure at the center of the airfield. Ella stood in front of the group with the heat of the runway still rising off her flight suit. She did not take the podium that was offered. She did not ask for a microphone. She raised one hand, and the group stilled. 9 years ago. I disappeared because I had to, not because I wanted to, she said. I was pulled from flight status because of what I found buried in our systems. A backdoor framework, laid in pieces, designed to be dormant, invisible until it was needed. The mission was not to fly. It was to vanish. She glanced toward General Jordan, who stood now with the Vector 11 directive in hand, his expression unreadable. "The satellite ping that shut down your systems tonight was a handshake I told only one person about," she continued. "That person was Theo. I told him to wait. I told him it might be years. It was—" Theo stepped forward, his eyes bloodshot, not from lack of sleep but from something deeper. He held up the page she had given him, now laminated by command and entered into record. "She left it with me because she knew I wouldn't forget, and because I blamed myself. Every day since we lost her. But now I know we never did." Riley moved to Ella's left, her voice quiet but clear. "You saved the base tonight. But do you understand what it cost those who thought you were gone?" Ella turned her eyes to the woman who had once guided grieving aircrews and written condolence letters. Her reply came softly. "Yes. I have carried that weight too. It was the price of silence. But I came back because I knew it couldn't end there. I don't want anyone else carrying guilt that never belonged to them." There was a pause. Then Riley asked what no one else dared. "What now?" Ella looked out over the assembled personnel. Many had removed their gloves, some still holding helmets under one arm, as if unsure whether to stand at attention or step forward. "Now," she said, "we build something for the ones who never got to come back. For those who left under classified orders and returned to a world that no longer knew what they gave. I want to establish a program for them. For the silent. For the ones we wrote off. We need to stop burying people before they're gone." There was no applause, just stillness, the kind of silence that meant everyone had heard her. A small voice came from the edge of the crowd. A cadet, barely out of training, with sandy brown hair pulled into a regulation braid. She stepped forward and squared her shoulders. "Can I train under you?" Ella looked at her, something breaking loose in her expression, something old and warm. "What's your name?" "Noah." Ella nodded once. "Then yes, you can—" Jordan approached next. In his hand was a flight badge, slightly bent at one corner. He held it out without ceremony. The inscription bore her name, the rank restored, the status changed from inactive to field active. She took it, said nothing, and tucked it into her palm. No brass band, no ceremony, just a return. They walked together toward the memorial wall, where her name still waited beneath the light. The line beneath it had been altered by the base's archivist. It now read, "Active, Vector 11, Protocol." The wall was not a place of endings anymore. Not for her. Theo stood beside her. He carried something wrapped in cloth. When he unfolded it, the object inside was scuffed and dull. Her old flight helmet, the same one she had left behind. He handed it to her. "I kept it cleaned, mostly." She smiled, the expression brief but real. "It fits better now," she said. They stood in silence for a long time, until the others began to drift away, still looking back, still unsure whether what they had seen would ever be fully explained. But some things didn't need to be. Later that week, in a small classroom inside the operations annex, Ella met with a group of pilots. They were all names that had disappeared from rosters over the last decade. Some had come home early from covert assignments. Others had been medically retired before their missions had even been acknowledged. They sat in folding chairs, unsure what to expect. Ella walked to the front and spoke without notes. "We are not ghosts. We are the guardians no one sees. But from now on, we speak for each other." Riley sat in the back row, listening. Noah sat in the front, scribbling notes. Outside, the wall remained. Her name remained, but its meaning had changed. The ones who vanish sometimes return, and when they do, they bring with them the truth no one else was willing to carry. She was never missing. She was waiting for the moment when the world would need the kind of strength that does not demand recognition, the kind that prepares in silence, stays grounded in purpose, and acts when no one else can. For 9 years, Ella carried out a mission that asked her to disappear, not because she was expendable, but because she mattered too much to risk. And when the call came not in words, But in silence she returned. Not for thanks. Not for rank. But because the job was not finished. This story is not about glory. It is about self-worth held quietly, about independence that never needed permission, and about the quiet power of showing up when it matters most. If this story spoke to you, take a moment to reflect or share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, consider following along.